One dinner on the
Good
Gold
evening,
Coast,
sir. Can I?
and the richest man in Chicago
Wow! Are you
learned
deaf
what
or
his
just
money
slow?
could not buy. He thought she couldn't
Sorry,
understand
sir,
him.
no.
That was the whole game.
She'll go home
That
to
was
some
the engine
sad
underneath
little
everything that
apartment
happened that night, in the
That's the
dining room
ceiling
of
of
the
her
most
whole life.
exclusive restaurant in Chicago. A man leaning across a white tablecloth in a $4,000 jacket, speaking fast and ugly French at a young black waitress in a starched apron, certain in his bones that she was too poor and too plain and too far beneath him to catch a single word of it. He called her a peasant. He said it with a smile, so the diners at the next table would think he was complimenting the wine. She refilled his water and said, "Of course, sir," in flat, unaccented English, and she did not let it touch her face. What the man did not know, what he could not have known, because he had never once in his life looked closely at a person he had already decided was furniture, was that the young woman holding his water carafe had spent her childhood summers in the valleys of the Loire, that her French was older and finer than his by a generation and a continent, that the diploma he assumed she lacked was from Cornell, with honors, and that the building he was sitting in, the chair beneath him, the empire whose throat he had spent 6 quiet months closing his hand around, all of it, every brick, would one day belong to her. Her name was Solène Calloway. She was 25 years old, and the man insulting her in a dead language he had bought in business school was about to make the single most expensive mistake of his life. But that comes later. First, you need to understand why a young woman worth more than most city blocks was polishing silverware until her thumb went numb. You need to understand the man who built the empire out of nothing on the South Side, and the strange, hard promise he made his daughter carry. You need to understand the woman who died and left her voice behind in her daughter's mouth, in a language nobody at that table believed she could speak. This is also a story about a real thing that real predators do to family businesses. A quiet, legal, devastating thing with a boring name, and about a neighborhood in Chicago where a poor man once built something out of nothing and dared to keep it. It is about the price of contempt. It is about what a rich man's money cannot buy and what a poor man's daughter will never, ever sell. Stay with me. This one turns slow, and then all at once. The restaurant was called Maison d'Or, and it sat on the Gold Coast like a secret the rich kept only from each other. You did not stumble into Maison d'Or. You did not find it on an app. The reservation list was a 6-month thing if you were nobody, and a phone call thing if you were somebody, and there were maybe 400 people in the country who were the right kind of somebody. Inside, the dining room was a held breath, baccarat chandeliers laying warm gold light over walnut paneling that had come out of a demolished bank on LaSalle Street in 1974. The air carried truffle and clarified butter and old burgundy, and under all of it, very faint, the smell of beeswax, because the floors were still polished by hand. In the service corridor behind the swinging doors, under fluorescent light that flattered no one, a young woman was rubbing a butter knife with a linen cloth until her thumb ached. Her apron was the standard stiff white. Her dress was a plain black sheath. Her name tag, pinned over her heart, said one word: Solène. No last name. That had been deliberate. Third time Solène. Wendell Pryor did not raise his voice. He never did. He simply appeared at her shoulder, the way he had been appearing at people's shoulders for 26 years. A tall, dry, silver-templed man in a captain's tailcoat, and he tapped one finger against the knife she was holding. You can see the cloth dragging, that little grey smear, right there along the spine. Do it again. Yes, Wendell. And tuck that piece of hair. We are selling perfection in here. We are not selling a Tuesday. She tucked the loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, took a fresh cloth, and started over. Here is the thing about Wendell Pryor. He was one of perhaps 5 people in that building who knew exactly who Solène was. He knew her father owned the restaurant. He knew her father owned the tower the restaurant sat in, and the hotel above it, and 11 more like it across 4 cities. He had held her when she was 3 days old, and on the direct, unbending instruction of the man who signed both their checks, Wendell Pryor treated her worse than he treated a first-week busser. and he had been doing it for 4 months, and it cost him something every single day, because Solomon Calloway had a philosophy, and the philosophy was a stone you could not move. You cannot own the stage until you have swept it. Solomon Calloway was 68 years old, and he had built a billion-dollar hospitality empire out of a single 12-stool lunch counter at 47th and what used to be South Park, in the heart of Bronzeville, back when Bronzeville was still the black metropolis, and a man with dark skin could not get a business loan from a white bank to save his life. So he had gone to the one bank that would have him, the kind of bank that men like Jesse Binger had built for people like Solomon when nobody else would. And he had borrowed $300, and he had fed people pork chops and greens and sweet potato pie. He fed steelworkers and Pullman porters and school teachers, and the occasional jazzman coming off a set at the Regal. He learned that hospitality was not about the food. It was about dignity. It was about a man who got treated like a mule all day at the mill, sitting down at a clean counter and being called Sir. 40 years later, he owned Maison d'Or, where a single dinner cost more than that lunch counter used to take in a week, and he still believed the exact same thing. Dignity was the product. Everything else was decoration. And so when his only child came home from Cornell with a hospitality management degree and a 40-page proposal for European expansion and every reason in the world to walk straight into a corner office, Solomon Calloway had handed her an apron instead. 6 months bussing, 6 months serving, 6 months in the kitchen, no special treatment, no manager's salary, no protection from the customers, who were getting worse every year. He did not tell the staff who she was. He wanted her to be invisible, because he wanted her to learn the one thing you can only learn while you are invisible, which is what the world is like, for the people nobody looks at. It had been the hardest year of Solène's life. Her feet were a disaster. Her lower back never fully stopped aching after a double. She had been snapped at and finger-clicked and looked through and twice propositioned by men older than her father, and she had absorbed all of it with the serene, anxious-free smile they teach you to wear. Some nights, she lay in her small apartment, furious at her father for putting her here. Some nights, she understood exactly why he had. Most nights, it was both at once. There was one more reason her French was perfect, and it was the reason she did not talk about. Her mother, Marie-Ange, had been born in Port-au-Prince and raised partly in Paris, a doctor's daughter who could quote Baudelaire and bone a fish in the same breath, and who had met Solomon Calloway at a hotel conference in Montreal and decided, against the advice of everyone she knew, that this serious, scarred, self-made American man was the one. She had raised Solène in 2 languages. She had taken her every summer to a stone farmhouse near Tours, where Solène had learned her French not from a classroom but from her grandmother's kitchen, where the language went in alongside the smell of duck fat and the particular grey light of the Loire at 6 in the evening. Marie-Ange had died 4 years ago, pancreatic, fast, cruel, and ever since, when Solène spoke French, she could hear her mother in her own mouth, and it was the closest thing to a séance she would ever allow herself. Table 9 is finishing their entrees, Wendell said. Already moving. Clear it, then check water at 4. And Solène. He paused, just for a second, and something old and warm flickered under the professional mask. Steady hands tonight. The room feels strange. She did not know what he meant. She picked up 2 leather menus, smoothed her apron, took a breath, and pushed through the swinging doors into the gold. The change from the kitchen corridor to the dining floor was always a small shock, like surfacing from deep water. Back there, it was steel and shouting. Out here, it was a slow ballet. Waiters drifting, resetting forks with the precision of surgeons, voices kept low under the chandeliers. Solène moved across the floor easily now. 4 months had given her that. She cleared table 9 with a murmured, "May I, sir?" and turned toward table 4. And that was when the front doors opened, and the temperature of the room dropped. Desmond Larkin did not enter a room. He annexed it. He was 41 years old, and built like money. Tall, lean, in a charcoal Brioni suit that fit him the way good suits fit men who have stopped pretending the price matters. His head was clean-shaven, and his jaw was set in a permanent half-smile that had nothing to do with warmth, and his eyes went around Maison d'Or the way an auctioneer's eyes go around an estate sale, not admiring, pricing. He was the founder of Pinnacle Capital Partners, and Pinnacle Capital Partners was known, in the small rooms where these things were known, for hostile takeovers, for buying up the debt of struggling companies and squeezing until the assets fell out, and for leaving behind a great deal of money for a very few people, and a great deal of nothing for everyone else. On his arm was a young woman in a dress that cost more than it should have. Brielle Santos, 23, an aspiring fashion influencer whose great ambition in life appeared to be the correct pairing of handbags with sports cars. She glanced around the silent, gleaming room with the slightly hunted look of a person who suspects she does not belong somewhere and is determined not to show it. "Good evening, Mr. Larkin." Pascal Beaumont, the maître d'œuvre, glided forward, smooth as poured cream, and inclined his head precisely the correct number of degrees. "Welcome back to Maison d'Or. Skip it, Pascal." Desmond did not look at him. He shrugged off his cashmere overcoat and held it out behind himself without turning, fully confident that something would catch it. Something did. A young man came scrambling from the coat room to save $4,000 of cashmere from the floor. The young man's name was Deshawn. He was 19. He worked the coat room and bussed on weekends, and he was 11 credits from an associate's degree at Harold Washington College, and he caught the coat with both hands and said, "Good evening, sir. May I take—" "Did I say you could speak to me?" Desmond said it lightly, almost pleasantly, the way you'd correct a dog. He still had not looked at the boy. "Just hang it. Try not to crease it." Deshawn's jaw worked once. He said, "Yes, sir," and took the coat away, and the back of his neck was the color of a man swallowing something whole. Solène watched this from across the floor, and the menus went a little tight in her hands. "I want the corner, the one by the window." Desmond's voice carried now, carefully pitched to be heard by the nearest tables. "The good one." Pascal kept his smile, though a single muscle moved in his jaw. "I am so sorry, Mr. Larkin. That table has been reserved for some weeks for the Consul General. I have prepared a beautiful table for you, in the center of the room. I don't care if it's reserved for the Pope." Desmond smiled wider. "I spend $250,000 a year in this building. I'm entertaining tonight. You'll clear the corner, or I will make a phone call, and by tomorrow morning you'll be working the drive-through window at a Portillo's. Do we understand each other?" Brielle laughed, a nervous little chime, and squeezed his bicep. "Desmond, you're so bad." And from across the dining room, watching the whole performance, Solène Calloway felt the floor tilt under her, because she had just placed his face. She knew exactly who Desmond Larkin was. She had read his file. She had read it 3 nights ago, at 2 in the morning, in her small apartment, after her father had called and used a voice she had never heard him use before. A thin voice, an old voice. Solomon Calloway, who feared nothing, who had stared down white bankers and Teamsters bosses, and a hotel fire that nearly killed him in 1981, had called his daughter at midnight and tried to sound like everything was fine, and had failed, because Pinnacle Capital Partners had spent 6 months buying up the debt that Solomon had taken on to expand into Europe, quietly, through shells, through fronts, through names that meant nothing, until you traced them all the way up and found the same man at the top. And now, Desmond Larkin held enough of the Calloway Empire's paper to put his hand on its windpipe, and he was getting ready to squeeze. The man strangling her father's life's work was standing 40 feet away in a $4,000 jacket, demanding a window table, and he had no idea who she was. "Brace yourself, Calloway," Wendell murmured, sweeping past her with a tray of champagne flutes, using her real name, the way he only did when no one could hear, the barbarians at the gates. Pascal, who knew Solomon's policy better than anyone, never a scene in the dining room, never let a customer's ugliness disturb the other guests. bowed his head. "Of course, Mr. Larkin. I will make the arrangements." And Solène watched, with a sinking certainty, where Pascal was leading them. The corner, table 7, her section. She stood very still in the middle of the most beautiful dining room in Chicago, holding 2 leather menus, and she did not feel afraid. That surprised her. She had expected to feel afraid. Instead, she felt something cold and clear and almost calm settle over her. The feeling her father got right before he closed a deal. The feeling her mother got right before she said something in French that ended an argument forever. He thought she was invisible. For 4 months, being invisible had been a punishment. Tonight, she realized, smoothing her apron and starting toward table 7, it was going to be a weapon. Let him talk, she thought. Let him say every single thing he believes. Let him dig. She picked up the wine list on her way. She was going to give Mr. Larkin the most perfect service of his life. She reached table 7 just as Desmond was settling into the leather banquette, already unhappy about something. "Brielle, look at these glasses." He held one up to the chandelier and turned it, disgusted. Regal, but the budget line. Pathetic. Solomon Calloway is losing his touch. The man is a dinosaur. I should have bought this place and gutted it when I had the chance. He set the glass down hard. "Soon enough. It looks pretty nice to me," Brielle said weakly, running a fingertip around the rim of her water glass. Solène arrived at the table with the most neutral, professional posture she owned. "Good evening. Welcome to Maison d'Or. My name is Solène, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with some sparkling water, or perhaps a cocktail?" Desmond did not look up. He was scrolling his phone. The silence stretched. 10 full seconds of it. An old power move, making the help wait for permission to exist. Solène stood perfectly still, her face untroubled, and waited, because she had learned how to wait. Finally, he locked the phone and dragged his eyes up the length of her. Slow, with open contempt, they stopped on the plain uniform, the absence of jewelry, real Evian, and bring the reserve wine list. The real one, not the little brochure you hand the tourists. "Of course, sir. Room temperature Evian, and the reserve list. I'll be right back." She turned. She felt his stare burning the back of her dress, and the audacity of the man was almost something to admire, the way a wildfire is something to admire from a great enough distance. He was sitting in her family's restaurant, insulting her father's stemware, treating her like a slow-witted servant, and he had built his entire fortune on doing exactly this kind of thing to exactly these kinds of people. She brought the reserve book, the heavy leather one full of bottles worth more than most people's cars. "Your reserve list, sir." She offered it with both hands. He snatched it without a word, opened it, scanned, and she could see the next thing forming, because she had spent 4 months watching men like him decide to perform their superiority for the women they were with. He closed the book with a loud snap and leaned back, a small, cruel smile. Then he spoke to her in French, fast, idiomatic, the kind of French that an American man learns in an MBA program in Fontainebleau and uses for the rest of his life as a status weapon. Slightly nasal, a little aggressive, the grammar a half beat off, in ways a native would catch and a tourist never would. "I imagine," he said, in French, drawing the words out for Brielle's benefit, "that a girl with your, how shall we say, limited education will not understand half of what is written in here." Solène's heart gave one hard knock. Her face did not move. French. He was testing her. What Desmond Larkin could not have known is that her dead mother was from Paris, that she had learned this language in a farmhouse in the Loire before she could read English, and that her French was not merely fluent, but aristocratic, supple, and quietly, devastatingly superior to the corporate bark coming out of his mouth. But Solène knew exactly what to do. She tilted her head, just slightly, with the pleasant confusion of someone who hasn't quite heard. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't catch that." Brielle giggled, bright and oblivious. "Oh my God, Desmond. She doesn't speak French. Don't be mean." "It isn't mean, Brielle. It's a tragedy. He's what I'm Kane, she what I'm K what I'm Kate." what I'm taste. It is genuinely sad that a restaurant claiming to serve authentic French haute cuisine staffs itself with people who probably struggle to read a transit map, let alone understand a Grand Cru classification. He turned back to Solène, and the cruelty in his eyes sharpened, and he went back to French, slower this time, reaching for complicated old vocabulary, specifically to leave her behind. Look at you, a little peasant in an apron, pretending she has the right to stand in this room. Bring me the Chateau Margaux, the 96, and pray to God you do not drop it with those clumsy common hands. The blood went hot under Solène's skin. The naked class hatred of it was breathtaking. He had called her a peasant, insulted her hands, mocked her intelligence, all of it hidden behind a language he was certain she could not cross. He was using her as a prop to inflate himself in front of a woman he barely seemed to like. Solène kept the polite, slightly blank smile. If I understood you correctly, sir, you'd like to order a bottle of wine. Could you point to it on the list for me? Desmond rolled his eyes for the room. My God, it's like talking to a golden retriever. Yes, wine. He stabbed his finger at the page. The Chateau Margaux, 1996. Decanted. Do you know what decanted means? Or shall I draw you a picture? I'm familiar with the process, sir. She took the list from him, calm. An excellent choice. I'll have the sommelier prepare it right away. She walked away. Behind her, very quietly. In French, he said, "Et dépêche-toi, petite idiote." Hurry up, little idiot. She got back to the service station with her knuckles white around the leather. Trouble? At 7? Wendell materialized beside her. He had read her shoulders. Mr. Larkin exercising his language skills. He ordered the Margaux, 96. Her voice came out very low, very even, and he called me a peasant and an idiot. Wendell went still, in French. He thinks I don't understand him. She turned and looked out at the floor. Desmond was leaning across the table, talking animatedly at Brielle, who watched him with the glazed admiration of a woman trying very hard to enjoy herself. He's using it to humiliate me without making a scene that would get him thrown out. It's cowardice in a nice suit. I'm telling your father. Wendell's voice had gone hard. Right now, Solomon does not tolerate a guest speaking to staff like that, let alone know. She caught his sleeve. Wendell, don't tell my father. He stared at her. Solène, be reasonable. That man is dangerous in ways you don't understand. I understand more than you think. Her eyes had narrowed, and a plan was assembling itself behind them, piece by piece, the way her mother used to lay out a table. If my father throws him out right now, Larkin wins. He gets to play the victim. He gets to call a reporter and trash Maison d'Or, and he learns nothing. And worse, he walks out of here with everything he came in here already holding. She let go of Wendell's sleeve. Let him stay. Let him talk. A man who thinks no one in this room can understand him will say things he should not say. Wendell studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, the old captain's mouth twitched. Your mother used to get that exact look, right before somebody's whole evening fell apart. He shook his head. What do you need? I need you to keep my section. I need you to make sure no one tells him my name. She picked up the wine. And I need you to keep your ears open at the next table over, because I have a feeling Mr. Larkin is here to celebrate something. She delivered the Margaux herself, performed the ritual flawlessly, candle and decanter, the cork drawn whole, the pour clean as silk. Desmond barely glanced at it. He was deep into a monologue. The problem with the working class, Brielle, he was saying, expansive now, the wine loosening him, is that they have no vision. None. They're perfectly content to do their little tasks for people like us. Take our waitress here. He nodded at Solène without looking at her. Bright enough, in her way. But she'll go home tonight to some sad apartment, and that's the ceiling of her entire life. And she's fine with it. And that's the difference between them and us. Solène said, Your wine needs about 20 minutes to breathe, sir. Clear English, no accent. I'll return shortly for your order. I want to make sure tonight is unforgettable. She turned and left him there, soaking in his own certainty. And over the next 40 minutes, while she tended a federal judge at table 2 and a tech founder at table 5, she kept one ear, always, on table 7. And Desmond Larkin, certain he was surrounded by golden retrievers, talked. He talked about the closing. He talked, in that carrying, self-important voice, about how next month he would hold a board meeting in this very dining room, because there would be a great deal to celebrate. He talked about how the old man had over-leveraged himself reaching for London, and now the paper was sitting in Pinnacle's vault, every dollar of it bought at 60 cents. He talked, laughing, about how the beautiful part, the truly beautiful part, was that the collateral on the original term loan wasn't just the new European properties, it was the crown jewels, the flagship hotel, the Gold Coast Tower, and the very first building, the original. A little restored building on 47th Street that the old man kept on the books for sentimental reasons, a building Solomon Calloway apparently could not bring himself to ever let go of. Solène, refilling a water glass 3 tables away, went absolutely still. The building on 47th Street. That was not a restaurant anymore. Her father had turned the original lunch counter, decades ago, into something else. He had turned it into a tribute. It held her grandfather's first cash register. It held the booth where Solomon had proposed to Marie-Ange. It held a wall of photographs, 60 years of a family that built something out of 300 borrowed dollars and refused to disappear. And in the back, in a small private room her father visited alone on the anniversary every year, it held her mother's recipes, handwritten, in French, in Marie-Ange's own looping hand. That was the collateral. That was what Desmond Larkin intended to take and sell for parts, and he was laughing about it over a $5,000 bottle of wine, because he thought the woman pouring his water could not understand a single word. And then he said one more thing, lower now, leaning toward Brielle, and Solène had to drift closer to a side station to catch it. And the cherry on top, Desmond murmured, is that the old man doesn't even know yet how cooked he is, because his own people sold him out. One of his own. Somebody on the inside has been feeding me the covenant terms for months. He chuckled and swirled his Margot. You'd be amazed what a man will do to his family for the right number, Brielle. Amazed. Solène set down the carafe before her hand could shake. Somebody on the inside. One of her father's own. She walked, very calmly, back through the swinging doors into the kitchen corridor, and she leaned against the cold stainless steel for 1 second, and then she straightened up, because Calloways do not lean, and she understood with total clarity that the gentle midnight phone call from her father had not told her the half of it. The empire was not in danger. The empire was already on the table, and the knife was already in it, and the man holding the knife had been let in the front door by someone they trusted. Her father was in the building. She found him exactly where she knew he would be, in the shadow of the mahogany archway that led to the kitchen, the one spot in Maison d'Or from which a man could watch the entire dining room without being seen. Solomon Calloway stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his silver hair catching the chandelier light, his grey eyes, the same grey as his daughter's, fixed on table 7. Pascal must have told him, or Wendell. Someone had told him a guest was abusing his staff, and Solomon Calloway had come down from the hotel offices to see for himself. Daddy, I have been watching for 20 minutes. His voice was a low gravel. He did not turn his head. I have watched that man speak to my staff like they were dirt under his shoe. I have watched him speak to my daughter that way. A muscle moved in his jaw. Pascal has security ready. I will have him removed myself. No. Now he turned, and for 1 second she saw it, the thing he had been hiding on the midnight phone call, the thing he would never say out loud. Underneath the fury there was fear, real fear, an old man's fear, and it broke her heart to see it on the face of a man she had spent her whole life believing was made of granite. You don't understand who that is, he said. I understand exactly who that is, she said. His name is Desmond Larkin. He owns our debt. He has been buying it for 6 months, at 60 cents on the dollar, through shell companies, and the collateral is the flagship and the Gold Coast Tower, and the building on 47th Street. He's planning to trigger the covenants and take everything within the month. He's going to sell it for parts, and somebody on our own board has been feeding him the terms. She watched her father's face go grey. I learned most of that in the last hour, Daddy, from his own mouth, because he thinks I'm a waitress. Solomon Calloway stared at his daughter, and something complicated moved through his face, pride and shame and grief all at once. Then the fear turned, the way fear does, into anger, and the anger came out sideways, at the nearest person, which was her. You should not be eavesdropping on grown folks' business. It came out harder than he meant it. This is not a thing for you, Solène. This is a war between men who have been at this for 40 years. You have been carrying plates for 4 months. You go back on the floor and you let me handle my house. It landed like a slap, and they both heard how wrong it was the second it left him. She did not flinch. She had learned, this year, how not to flinch. I have a degree in this, Daddy. Her voice stayed level, but there was steel under it now, his own steel, handed down. I wrote you a 40-page plan for Europe that you never read because you were grieving and proud, and you didn't want your little girl in the room. The European arm isn't the failure he thinks it is. The numbers are real. I have known it for 2 years. She took a breath, and I haven't been carrying plates for 4 months. I have been listening for 4 months. You wanted me to learn what the world is like for the people nobody looks at. Well, I learned, and tonight, the most dangerous man in this city looked right through me and told me his entire plan, because he could not imagine that the woman pouring his water was the one person alive who could stop him. The silence between them was enormous. You knew who he was when he walked in, Solomon said slowly, and you let him sit down. I let him talk. Her father looked at her for a long, long moment, the way you look at a stranger who turns out to have your own eyes. What have you done, Solène? It was not quite a question. Tell me what you have already done. So she told him, quickly, quietly, in the shadow of the archway, while across the room a billionaire mocked her empty chair. She told him that 3 nights ago, after his phone call, she had not slept, that she had pulled every document she could reach, that she had seen what he had been too proud and too heartbroken to show her, that the trap was nearly sprung, and that no one had moved to refinance the distressed paper, which made no sense until she understood that someone was steering him away from every lifeline on purpose, that she had started making calls, old calls. Her mother's people in Montreal and Miami, the Haitian banking families Marie-Ange had grown up among, people who remembered the Calloway name and owed the Calloways nothing but remembered, and a legitimate institution that had read her 40-page plan in 72 hours and seen what Desmond Larkin refused to see, that the company was not dying, it was being murdered, and that a healthy company is worth refinancing at par. There's a commitment on the table, she said. Real money, enough to pay Larkin off at face value before he can trigger anything. It turns his leverage into nothing. He stops being a predator and becomes just another bondholder getting paid back in full. She paused. It is not signed yet. They're deciding tonight. It might not come, but it might. Solomon Calloway, who had not been surprised by anything in 20 years, put one hand flat against the cool mahogany of the archway to steady himself. And the man on the inside, he said, the one feeding him our terms. Solène had been turning this over for the last 20 minutes, fitting it against everything she knew, and she did not want to say it, because saying it would hurt her father in a place that was already bruised. Who steered you away from refinancing, Daddy? Every time. Who told you the European numbers were a disaster? Who has had the covenant terms on his desk for 2 years? She watched her father's face as he arrived where she had already arrived. She watched it cost him, Garrett. The name came out of him like something pulled. Garrett Vane, the CFO, the man who had been at Solomon Calloway's right hand for 19 years, who had eaten Thanksgiving at his table, who had been a pallbearer at Marie-Ange's funeral. No, not Garrett. You'd be amazed, Solène said gently, repeating the thing she had heard a billionaire laugh into his wine. What a man will do to his family for the right number. Her father closed his eyes. When he opened them, The granite was back, but there was a crack running through it now that would never quite close. "What do you need from me?" he said. The exact words he had refused to say 20 minutes ago. "Anything. I need you to do nothing." She almost smiled. "I need you to go back upstairs and let me finish my shift. I need you to not throw him out, no matter what he does, no matter what he writes, no matter how much it costs you to swallow it. Because the longer he sits in that chair believing he has already won, the more rope he hangs himself with. Let him celebrate, Daddy. Let him think he's burying you." She glanced toward the floor, where Deshawn was passing with a tray, his shoulders still carrying the humiliation of the coat room. "And one more thing. That boy, Deshawn. Larkin treated him like an animal tonight, and that child is working himself through college 11 credits at a time. When this is over, I want him in your management training program. He has more dignity in his little finger than Desmond Larkin has in his entire portfolio." Her father looked at the boy, then at his daughter, and the slow, proud, scarred smile that broke across his face was the realest thing Solène had seen in 4 years. "Your mother," he said quietly, "would not have believed her eyes. She'd have believed them." Solène straightened her apron. "She's the one who taught me French." She turned to go back to the floor. Her father caught her wrist. Once, gently. "Go get him, baby," Solomon Calloway said. Back at table 7, Desmond Larkin had decided to make her fail. It is an old trap. The kind, greedy men love, demand the impossible, and when the help cannot deliver, feast on their incompetence. He had pushed away the tasting menu, with contempt lazy chefs telling me what to eat, ordered Iranian beluga caviar, with a sneer about cheap metal spoons that he was certain would catch the restaurant out, and been quietly informed that Maison d'Or had not served caviar on metal since before he could drive. Now he leaned back, folded his arms, and went for the kill. "For the main course," he announced, loud enough for the judge at table 2, "I want something that is not on this tired little menu, something that requires actual skill from your kitchen. Impress me, if you're capable of it." And there it was, the exact thing she had been waiting for all night. Because Solène Calloway was not a waitress. She was Solomon Calloway's daughter and Marie-Ange's daughter, and she had spent 3 weeks of one Loire summer learning under the hand of a chef who had trained her own mother, the most punishing, theatrical, nearly extinct dish in the entire French canon. "If the gentleman is looking for something truly traditional and technically demanding," she said, her tone all deference with a single thread of challenge woven through it, "I might suggest the canard à la presse." Desmond paused. It was clear from his face that he had never heard of canard à la presse, pressed duck, a 19th century dish so elaborate, so expensive, so brutally difficult, that only a handful of restaurants on earth still made it. A whole roasted duck, the breast carved away, the carcass crushed in a heavy silver press at the table to extract the juices, the blood and marrow flambéed with cognac, into a sauce of almost obscene richness. A dish for true connoisseurs. A dish Desmond Larkin could not possibly admit he did not know. Ah, yes, the pressed duck. He recovered, nodding as though it were his usual Tuesday. Finally, a halfway intelligent suggestion. "We'll have it. But if that sauce breaks, or that flambé is rushed, I am not paying." "An excellent choice, sir." She bowed her head, and as she walked away, he could not resist one last shot, in French, to Brielle, a peasant, lecturing me on haute cuisine. "She'll probably set the building on fire. Prepare for a disaster." Solène pushed through the swinging doors into the roar and steel of the kitchen. "Chef." She raised her voice over the hoods and the clatter of copper. "Chef Bertrand." The executive chef turned from the pass. Bertrand was a wide, hot-tempered man, lion-trained, with forearms like ham hocks and a reputation for throwing pans. He was one of the few who knew her name. "Solène." "What?" "I need the silver duck press brought up from the cellar." Table 7 just ordered the canard. À la presse. "A beat. I'm carving it. At the table. Myself." The kitchen went silent for 2 full seconds. Bertrand's caterpillar eyebrows climbed to his hairline. Press duck. For that animal, at 7. He folded his arms. He won't know the difference between a cognac reduction and ketchup. And no, your father will have my head if I let his daughter run the press for a man like that. It's heavy, it's hot, and if it spits, it ruins your uniform and his suit. Chef, I spent 3 weeks in Lyon mastering this dish under your own maître. She did not blink. The Callaway authority sat plain in her eyes. He wants a performance. He wants to watch me fail. I am going to give him a masterpiece. Fire the duck. Bertrand stared at her, and then he barked one short, delighted laugh. Very good, mademoiselle. He was already turning, already shouting orders down the line. The press goes up in 5 minutes. Do not embarrass my kitchen. She washed her already clean hands at the steel sink, watching the water run over them. The clumsy, common hands a billionaire had mocked an hour ago. Tomorrow, she knew, a refinancing commitment might or might not be signed in a glass office across town. Tomorrow, Desmond Larkin meant to spring a trap that had taken him 6 months to build, and a man her father loved like a brother had handed him the key. Tomorrow it would all be decided, and right now, tonight, she had no idea if she had moved fast enough, or if any of it would hold. She dried her hands. She had a duck to carve, and she walked back out into the gold, alone, toward the man who was about to learn, in front of everyone, exactly who had been pouring his water. A current of attention moved through the dining room when the antique silver duck press was wheeled out on a mahogany cart. It did not look like kitchen equipment. It looked like an instrument of medieval torture, gleaming under the chandeliers, a heavy cylinder of solid silver topped by a great brass wheel. Beside it on the cart sat a roasted duck the color of dark wood, a copper flambe pan, a bottle of Louis XIII cognac, and a small crystal pitcher of reduced duck stock. Diners turned in their chairs. Even the federal judge set down his fork. Desmond's eyes widened a fraction as Solène rolled the cart to the edge of his table. He had assumed the chef would come, or the manager. Seeing the waitress, the peasant, standing behind the cart, genuinely threw him. He leaned forward and went to French, low and venomous. Be very careful, little girl. This equipment is worth more than your life. Do not make a fool of yourself in front of my guest. She ignored him completely. She drew on a pair of thin black heat-resistant gloves. With the economy of a surgeon, she transferred the duck to a carving board, took up the knife, and removed the breasts and legs in 4 clean strokes, laying the best meat aside on a warm silver cover to rest. Her movements were quick, exact, beautiful. A woman 3 tables over murmured something to her husband. Then came the part that separates the dish from every other dish on earth. Solène took the carcass, the bones and skin, and the rich dark organs, and fitted it into the silver press, and began to turn the heavy brass wheel. This required real strength. As the press tightened, the bones gave way, with a low crackle under the murmur of the room. Sweat shone at her hairline, and Desmond, watching her labor, smiled and went back to French and sipped his Margot. Look at her sweat. Manual labor. It's the only thing these people are good for. Beasts of burden. Solène's jaw set. Her hands did not shake. The pressure drove the marrow and blood and juices through the silver spout into the waiting crystal, a dark, concentrated essence. She lit the portable copper burner. She poured a generous measure of the Louis XIII into the pan, tilted it expertly, and the alcohol vapor caught the flame, and a column of blue and orange fire roared up toward the chandelier. Brielle gasped with delight. A ripple of quiet awe went around the room. Desmond frowned, irritated that the waitress was stealing his audience. Solène whisked the extracted juices into the burning cognac, fast and sure, and the sauce began at once to thicken, deepening into a glossy mahogany glaze. The smell of roasted meat, an old brandy and rich marrow rolled across the dining room. Intoxicating, charming, Desmond said dryly, changing tactics. If he could not mock her clumsiness, he would mock her mind. He raised his voice for the nearby tables. Tell me, Solène, What precise chemical reaction causes that sauce to thicken without flour or cornstarch? Assuming your high school taught you any actual science, it was a trap meant to expose her as a parrot, and it was, instead, the door she had been waiting for him to open. She did not look up. She plated the rested duck breast, fanning the slices with mathematical precision, and began to spoon the gleaming sauce across the meat. And when she answered, her voice carried clear and certain to every table that had gone quiet to listen. "It's thermal coagulation, Mr. Larkin." Her tone was that of a patient professor. "The proteins in the duck's blood, principally the serum albumin, denature when they meet the heat of the flambe. As they unfold, they bond to one another and form a natural protein matrix, which thickens the sauce. The cognac, with its high alcohol content, acts as a solvent for the fat-soluble flavor compounds in the bone marrow, while the alcohol cooking off concentrates the umami. The whole thing depends on holding the pan at roughly 70 degrees Celsius. Any hotter, and the proteins seize and curdle, and the sauce is ruined." She set the finished plate down in front of him with the soft click of fine porcelain. "Any cooler, and it never sets, and you're left with soup." Silence at table 7. "Your canard à la presse, sir," she said. "Bon appétit." Brielle was staring at her with open admiration. "Wow, you really know your stuff." Desmond's face had gone an ugly, mottled red. He had been comprehensively beaten. The peasant had just delivered a master's lecture in culinary chemistry while flawlessly executing one of the hardest dishes on the planet, and she had done it in front of his date and half the dining room. He grabbed his fork, hacked into the duck, and shoved a piece in his mouth, desperate for it to be tough, or oversalted or cold, desperate for a reason to scream. It melted on his tongue. It was, he understood with real rage, very likely the best thing he had ever eaten. Furious at the perfection of it, he retreated to the only weapon he had left. He hissed at her in French as she wiped down the silver, leaning close. "You think you're clever. You're a glorified plate carrier who memorized some facts like a parrot, and tonight you'll still go home to a slum. You are nothing. You are. That will be all." The voice did not shout, but it carried a low, terrible authority that silenced the entire corner of the room, and Desmond Larkin felt the hair on his arms stand up. He had no idea, yet, that everything was already over. The rest of the meal passed in seething silence on Desmond's side. He sulked through the chocolate soufflé. He refused to meet Solène's eyes while she finished the table. He was a predator who had missed his kill, and the shame of it was souring his $5,000 wine. When he finally threw his linen napkin onto the table, a deliberate breach of etiquette, he snapped his fingers in the air. "Check." She brought the black leather folder. The total was staggering. Between the beluga, the off-menu pressed duck, the 96 Margot and the rest, $16,450. She set the folder by his right hand. "Whenever you're ready, sir." He did not open it. He pulled a heavy, matte black American Express Centurion from his breast pocket and dropped it on the folder. "Run it, and get me your manager. Now." She ran the card at the station, watched the screen flash green, and printed the slips. She came back. Pascal arrived, summoned, smooth and grave, already briefed. "Mr. Larkin, was the canard à la presse not to your liking?" The service was a catastrophe. Desmond lied without effort, signing the merchant's slip in slashing strokes. He looked up at Pascal. "This girl is incompetent, rude, and entirely unsuited to a restaurant pretending to be this caliber. I want her off the floor tonight, and if I ever come back and see her face, I will pull every corporate account I have and make sure my entire network knows that Maison d'Or hires gutter trash." Pascal glanced at Solène. She gave a small shake of her head. "Not yet. I am so very sorry your experience fell short of expectations," Pascal said, his performance flawless. "I will record your complaint and pass it directly to ownership. See that you do." Desmond stood and buttoned his jacket. He looked down at the bill, and a nasty little smile crossed his face. He picked up the silver pen again, and at the bottom of the slip he wrote one last cruelty, in French, certain a manager would read it and use it as grounds to fire her. The food was acceptable. The service was disgusting, because this uneducated peasant has no place among civilized people. Fire her, or I will never return. Maison d'Or has become a joke. Then he drew a thick black line through the tip field, and in the space, on a $16,000 bill, he wrote a single, enormous zero. Come on, Brielle. This place is giving me a headache. Let's go somewhere actually exclusive. He walked toward the entrance without a backward glance. Brielle gave Solène a small, embarrassed, apologetic smile and hurried after him. Solène stood at the table and opened the folder and looked at the zero and the venomous French paragraph demanding she be fired, and the corner of her mouth curved into something sharp and patient. Wendell stepped up beside her and read it over her shoulder. He whistled low, 0 on 16,000, and a note calling you trash. That arrogance is practically radioactive. This isn't arrogance, Wendell, she said softly, lifting the slip by one corner like it was a piece of forensic evidence. This is a confession. She reached behind her back and untied her starched white apron and let it fall to the dining room floor, a violation of protocol so total that 3 nearby servers actually froze. Tell my father to meet me in the lobby, she said. I think it's time Mr. Larkin and I had a conversation in a language he actually understands. The grand lobby of Maison d'Or was a held breath of marble and gold, a checkerboard of Carrara stone, a vast antique baccarat chandelier pouring soft light down on departing guests. Desmond stood near the brass-handled doors, tapping the toe of a handmade Italian Oxford against the marble, snapping at the young valet, while Brielle reapplied lip gloss in a gilded mirror and silently decided that the most beautiful dinner of her life had been ruined by the ugliest man. The heavy soundproof door from the dining room opened with a soft click. Desmond glanced over his shoulder, expecting Pascal, a final groveling apology. Instead, it was the waitress. Except, the apron was gone, and without it, the plain black sheath and the white silk blouse no longer read as a uniform. They read as the quiet, expensive armor of an executive. Her posture, deferential all night, was suddenly straight as a blade. The blank service smile was gone. In its place was a cool, sovereign stillness he had seen before, but only ever across a negotiating table, only ever on the faces of people who could not be bought. What are you doing out here? Desmond's voice cracked across the marble. He took a step toward her, trying to use his height. Did Pascal finally fire you? If you've come to beg for your job, you're wasting your breath. You're finished in this city. I haven't come to beg, Mr. Larkin. Her voice had dropped an octave, lost all its bright service brightness, gone smooth and steady, and quiet enough to be dangerous. And I assure you, Pascal did not fire me. There's simply an unresolved matter regarding your transaction tonight that requires clarification. The transaction was perfect. I used the Centurion. If this is about the tip, forget it. Tips are for excellent service. You were a disaster. The transaction is not the issue. Slowly, evenly, she opened the leather folder. It's the addendum you chose to leave on the merchant copy that requires a response. Further clarification? He laughed, stepping closer, his face inches from hers, almost trembling with toxic certainty. It's perfectly clear, though I doubt you can read it, since you obviously lack a formal education. Let me translate for you. You are an incompetent peasant, and I have asked for you to be fired. Is there a problem? Vous vous attendiez à un certain niveau de quoi? Exactement, Monsieur Larkin. You expected a certain level of what? Exactly, Mr. Larkin. The words cut through the lobby like a freshly honed knife. It was not the stiff, nasal, corporate French he had brayed all night. It was a flawless, breathless, aristocratic Paris. Melodic, frighteningly precise, pouring out of her with the easy grace of someone who had spoken it since before she could read. Desmond physically recoiled, his mouth falling open. She took one step forward, closing the distance, and switched, for Brielle's benefit, into clear English. I understood every word you said to me tonight, Mr. Larkin. Every single one. She let it land. You called me a peasant. You insulted my hands, my intelligence, my place in the world. You hid behind a language because you believed your money bought you the right to be cruel without consequence. Her eyes did not leave his. Allow me to repeat back to your date a few of the things you said about me. While she sat 3 feet away, Brielle had gone very still by the mirror. When you told her you were teaching me about wine, Solène said gently, you were actually telling me I was a useless piece of furniture. When you told her you were explaining the duck press, you were calling me a beast of burden fit only for manual labor. You assumed I was too poor and too stupid to understand you. A pause. As for your knowledge of wine, it's laughable. You swirled a 96 Margaux like it was cheap syrup. You ordered the pressed duck because it was the most expensive thing you could point at, not because you have any palate at all. You are not a connoisseur, Mr. Larkin. You're a tourist with a credit card. Brielle's hand had come up to cover her mouth. Desmond, you said those things. In front of her, while I was sitting right there. He could not look at Brielle. He was trapped in Solène's gaze, comprehensively, completely exposed. The elegant menace stripped clean off him to reveal the frightened, insecure bully underneath. Who? He managed, his smooth voice in ruins. Who are you? The soft, deliberate sound of expensive shoes on marble answered him. Solomon Calloway stepped out of the shadow by the coat room. 68 years old, immaculate in a charcoal 3-piece, silver hair swept back, grey eyes, the exact shape and intensity of the young woman's, fixed on Desmond Larkin. Beside him stood Wendell, grim as a verdict. Desmond's entire body changed in an instant. The predator became the courtier. He straightened his lapels and produced a wide, desperate, ingratiating smile. Solomon, I didn't see you there. Always a pleasure to see the owner. I was just having a frank word with your staff about service standards, do not. Solomon's voice was quiet, and it filled the room. He did not take the offered hand. He let it hang in the air between them. You will not speak in my house. You will listen. He crossed the marble slowly, and absolute authority came off him in waves, and Desmond Larkin took an involuntary half-step back. My daughter, Solomon said, resting one hand lightly on Solène's shoulder, ran a flawless service tonight. She executed one of the most technically demanding dishes in our entire repertoire to perfection. She absorbed your insults without flinching and protected the dignity of my dining room while she did it. He lifted the slip so Desmond could see his own handwriting, and in return, you wrote that my staff are gutter trash, and you left a child who is putting himself through college standing in your contempt, and you left her a 0. The blood drained from Desmond Larkin's face so fast he swayed. His daughter, his eyes went from Solomon's grey glare to Celine's perfectly calm, triumphant stillness, and he saw it, the identical eyes, the identical proud jaw. Calloway. Her tag said only Solène, but it crashed into him like a freight train, all of it at once. The total ease with which she had handled a priceless silver press, the exact knowledge of thermal coagulation, the way she had never once flinched when he threatened her. She was not a peasant. She was the sole heir to the Calloway hospitality empire, a fortune worth more than $1 billion, and he had spent 2 hours calling her gutter trash to her face. Your daughter, Desmond stammered, every ounce of the slick arrogance gone. He sounded like a frightened child. Solomon, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. She was wearing an apron. She was pouring water. I had no idea. That is precisely the point, Mr. Larkin, Solène said, and her voice was without mercy. You never have any idea. You decided what she was worth the second you saw the apron, and you never looked again. It is the same thing you did to my father's company. You looked at a struggling balance sheet, and you decided it was carrion. You never bothered to look at what it actually was. Desmond's jaw worked. The company is a separate matter, a business matter. You don't understand the pressures of the market. I simply expected a certain level of what, exactly? Solomon Calloway's voice cracked like a whip. and even the valet flinched. You spend money. Yes. So does a wrecking ball. You believe wealth makes you immune to the basic decency owed between human beings. It does not. Hospitality is a sacred contract. We offer rest and art and service. In return, the guest offers the minimum kindness of one person to another. You broke that contract the moment you walked through my doors, and then you went home to my balance sheet and tried to break my family. It was a joke. Desmond was grasping now. Pathetic. The note. A bad joke. I was stressed. Solomon, let me make it right. I'll leave a $10,000 tip right now. Let me rewrite the bill. He fumbled for his jacket pocket, frantic to solve the problem, the only way he had ever known how, with money. Put your money away, Larkin. Solomon's voice went very low. It is no good here anymore. He took the merchant's slip from Solène's hand. He tore it in half, then in half again, and he let the pieces fall to the marble like dirty snow. And I think, Solomon said, you should hear the rest of it now. You're going to want to sit down for this part, Solène said, but there isn't a chair out here for you. So, Desmond Larkin stood frozen on the marble, his date already 6 feet away with her phone out, and he looked from father to daughter and felt the floor of his entire world begin to give. You came here tonight to celebrate, Solène said. I heard you. You told her you'd hold a board meeting in our dining room next month, because by then you'd have triggered the covenants and seized the flagship and the Gold Coast Tower and a little building on 47th Street that you intended to sell for scrap. She watched his face. You were very pleased with yourself. You said the beautiful part was that my father didn't even know how cooked he was, because one of his own people sold him out. How Desmond's voice failed. How could you possibly? You told me. You told all of it to the woman pouring your water, because you could not imagine she mattered. She let that sit. While I was carving your duck tonight, Mr. Larkin, a financing commitment was signed across town. A legitimate institution, one that actually read our European numbers instead of assuming they were garbage, is refinancing every dollar of the distressed paper your firm has been hoarding, at par, in full. By the end of next week, Pinnacle Capital will not hold a windpipe. You'll hold an ordinary bond that is being paid back to you, with interest, on schedule, and your leverage will be worth exactly nothing. Desmond Larkin made a small sound, and as for the man on the inside, Solomon's voice was iron now, and there was grief in it. But the iron was winning. Garrett Vane breached his fiduciary duty to this company, and fed you confidential covenant terms for the better part of 2 years. That is not a business matter, Mr. Larkin. That is tortious interference, and coordinating a loan-to-own scheme with a target's own officer is the kind of thing that ends firms. As of 1 hour ago, a complete record of every leak, every communication, and every dollar that changed hands sits with our counsel, and with a contact at the State Attorney General's office, and with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Garrett will answer for what he did to me, and so, I suspect, will you. You can't. Desmond's hands were shaking. Do you have any idea what this will do to me? I have investors. I have a fund. This will destroy me. You came to destroy a 60-year-old company that a poor man built out of 300 borrowed dollars, Solomon said. You came to sell my wife's recipes for scrap metal. Do not stand in my lobby and ask me for sympathy. He turned to Wendell. Wendell, have security. Bring Mr. Larkin's car around, and then go to the administrative office. His grey eyes never left Desmond. Mr. Larkin, his guest, and any corporate card associated with Pinnacle Capital Partners are now blacklisted from Maison d'Or, and flag his profile across the entire network. He is barred from every Callaway property in this country. The hotels, the restaurants, all of it. If a building anywhere carries the Callaway name, Desmond Larkin will not set foot in it again as long as he lives. For a man like Desmond, who lived and died by access, by being seen in the right rooms, it was a social execution. By tomorrow morning the story would be everywhere. He would be a leper in every city that mattered. Solomon, please. Every shred of arrogance was gone. He was a hollowed-out shell of the man who had swaggered in 2 hours before. Please. Solène looked at him. The apology, when it finally came, was empty, born of consequence and not of conscience. Your apology is noted, Mr. Larkin, she said, with no emotion at all. But it is not accepted. Have a pleasant evening. Your car is ready, sir. The valet appeared by the glass, holding the keys to a gleaming black Maybach. Desmond turned, mechanically, to Brielle. He reached for the last ally in the room. Brielle, come on. We don't need these people. Brielle clutched her handbag to her chest and looked at him like he was something she had found on the bottom of her shoe. Are you kidding me? After what I just heard you say to her? Her voice shook. You're a monster, Desmond. You're cruel. And you're fake. And you're not even smart. You just have money. Don't ever call me again. She turned on her heel and walked to the far side of the lobby to order a car, leaving him alone in the center of the marble. He looked at Solomon, whose face was stone. He looked at Wendell, whose stare could have drilled through bone. And finally, he looked at Solène, the peasant, the waitress, the woman who had taken him apart, brick by brick, without ever once raising her voice. There was nothing left to say. Without a word, Desmond Larkin turned and walked out through the heavy glass doors into the cold Chicago night, and folded himself into the back seat of his empty Maybach, and the door shut behind him with one final, heavy sound. The car pulled away from the curb and dissolved into the river of city traffic, and it took his whole world with it. Silence settled over the lobby. Solomon Calloway let out a long, slow breath, and the terrible tension drained out of his shoulders, and he turned to his daughter, and the slow, proud, scarred smile broke across his face again. Réelle than ever. Thermal coagulation, he said, shaking his head. You gave the man a chemistry lecture in the middle of a flambé. A genuine laugh escaped her, bright and clear, the first one in hours. He asked about the chemical reaction. Daddy, I couldn't very well leave a guest's question unanswered. He pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace and let her go. You handled that perfectly. You had him from the first pour. You never lost your composure. You never broke a single rule until the transaction was complete, and you let his own arrogance do the rest of the work. He looked at her with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, you move up to the executive floor. The European expansion is back on. It's yours, and I am going to read every page of that proposal tonight, the way I should have read it 2 years ago. There was a small movement near the coat room. Deshawn, the 19-year-old who had been called an animal, was standing half in the doorway, having watched the whole thing, his eyes huge. Solomon walked over to him. Son, what's your name? Deshawn, sir. Deshawn Mills. Deshawn Mills. Solomon put a hand on his shoulder, the same way he had put it on his daughter's. I'm told you're working your way through Harold Washington. 11 credits to go. Is that right? Deshawn nodded, not trusting his voice. Come see me Monday morning, upstairs. There's a management training program with your name on it. We pay your tuition. We pay you to learn this business from the top, not the bottom. A pause. A man's worth is not the coat he's wearing. It is how he carries himself when somebody decides he's nothing. You carried yourself like a Calloway man tonight, I noticed. Deshawn Mills, 19 years old, stood up a little straighter, and his eyes shone, and he said, Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, and meant it with his whole chest. Solomon turned back to his daughter, expansive now. The night won. Come on, let's go upstairs. I'll have Bertrand send up 2 plates of that duck, and we'll talk about London. But Solène was looking through the soundproofed glass doors into the dining room, where servers were drifting between the tables, where the chandeliers threw their soft gold light over the most beautiful room in Chicago, the room she loved with her whole heart. Thank you, Daddy, she said. But not tonight. He looked at her, puzzled. Not tonight. She reached down and picked up the crumpled white apron she had dropped on the marble. With practiced hands she shook it out and tied the stiff strings around her waist. Table 9 is finishing dessert, she said, and her grey eyes had that unshakable Calloway set to them. And somebody has to polish the silver on that duck press before Chef Bertrand loses his mind. I've still got 2 hours left on my shift. And Solomon Calloway watched his daughter push open the heavy oak doors and walk back into the dining room, back to the people nobody looks at, the apron tied around the most valuable young woman in the building. And he understood, with total certainty, that his empire was in the safest hands it could possibly be in, because she had learned the one thing he could not teach her in a corner office. She had learned what the apron was worth. Okay, let me step back for a minute before you scroll off. I want to be straight with you about what this story is and what it isn't. This is fiction. Solène isn't real. Solomon isn't real. Desmond Larkin isn't real. Though I promise you, his type is sitting in a glass office somewhere tonight, deciding that something good built by somebody else is just carrion he hasn't picked yet. Maison d'Or isn't real. Pinnacle Capital isn't real. But a few things in this story are real, and I put them in on purpose. Bronzeville is real. The South Side neighborhood where Solomon built his lunch counter was once called the Black Metropolis, and for a while it was one of the most important centers of black business and culture in the entire country. When white banks wouldn't lend to black men, people like Jesse Binger opened banks that would. There were insurance companies, theaters, newspapers, a whole self-made economy built by people who were told every single day that they were nothing. A lot of that legacy got bulldozed, literally, by highways and so-called urban renewal. Some of it is still standing. If you live near a neighborhood with a history like that, go learn its names. Those names deserve to be remembered. The financial thing in this story is real too, and it's the part I most want you to take seriously. There is a real strategy used by real firms where an investor quietly buys up the debt of a struggling company at a discount and then uses the fine print of the loan to seize the company's actual assets, the buildings, the brand, the land, and sell them off for parts. It is mostly legal. It has a few boring names, loan to own being one of them. It has happened to family businesses and to whole communities, and the people it happens to often don't see it coming because it arrives in a nice suit, speaking calmly, holding paperwork. I am not telling you this to scare you. I am telling you because the people who do it count on you not knowing the word for it. Now you know the word for it. The duck is real, by the way. Canard à la presse is a genuine, ancient, almost extinct French dish, and the thermal coagulation Solène lectures about, the blood proteins setting the sauce when they meet the heat, that's real chemistry. I didn't make it up to sound smart. I made her explain it, because she'd actually know. And here is the thing that isn't in any of the facts, but is the whole reason I wrote this. I have known Solènes. Maybe you have too. Maybe you are one. I'm not talking about the billion-dollar inheritance. I'm talking about the apron. I'm talking about the people who get looked through, the waitress, the busser, the home health aide, the night shift nurse, the kid in the coat room, 11 credits from a degree. The whole machine of this world runs on people that men like Desmond Larkin decide are furniture, and it decides it the second it sees the uniform, and it never looks again. So if you are one of those people, if you are the one carrying the plates while somebody decides you're nothing, I want you to hear me. The man in the $4,000 suit is not better than you. He has just never once been told no by someone he couldn't buy. Your worth was never the apron. It was always the way you carry yourself when somebody decides you don't matter. The story is neat. I know it's neat. Real life doesn't always hand you a father in the doorway, and a flambe and a villain who loses everything by midnight. I wrote it neat anyway, because sometimes you need to watch the arrogant lose, and the overlooked win, and dignity get handed back to the person it was stolen from, even if it's only in a made-up dining room on a made-up Gold Coast. Stories don't fix anything. They just remind you that some endings are possible. Thank you for watching this far. If something in this hit you, tell me in the comments. Tell me about the person in your life who gets looked through and shouldn't. Tell me about your own grandmother, or your own neighborhood, or the time somebody decided you were nothing and turned out to be very, very wrong. I read what people write, all of it. Take care of each other out there. The world looks at the suit. Be the kind of person who looks at the face,